because as strong views as you have, I have views on the contrary. For this item, it's not about you, Commissioner Ariola. It's about doing what is right, and my votes on this dais are always for what is right. The mayor spoke that in 2008 he worked to change early voting and expand it, but it wasn't 3 days before the election, in the middle of the election process.
It was.
And
Sorry, it was.
Please don't interrupt me. That's what makes this wrong. And if you were so concerned about early voting in 2008, and that if this issue was so important to you in July, when we passed the resolution to do 2 days of early voting, you could have raised it then. In September, when we had 2 separate meetings, you could have raised it at one of those meetings. In October, when we had 2 separate commission meetings, you could have raised it then. But instead, you allowed 5 commission meetings to pass. And it wasn't until the results of the election were announced that you added this item. And you didn't even do it right away as a regular item. You did it as only the mayor can and the commissioners can't. You added it as an emergency item over the weekend. And that leads to perception that you were trying to slip it through without the voters knowing whether that is true or not. And I can tell you, I've covered a zillion meetings for condominiums and homeowner associations. And despite the city attorney saying this is legally defensible, I am convinced that this is legally wrong. I am convinced that if a voter loses, we are opening the door for them to bring a lawsuit that we are going to have to defend. I would sue. I would sue. If I didn't win, I would sue the city and say, you changed the rules in the middle of the election process, and you did it to tamper with the election results. Whether it's defensible doesn't mean we'll win. They told us the Airbnb fines were defensible, but we lost. And in that opinion, the judge cited to the fact that he didn't think this passed the smell test, and this isn't going to pass the smell test either. Additionally, this body talks often about costs. Back when we were offered a choice to hold a special election to replace Commissioner in Group 4, this body said, oh my God, $300,000 for a special election? We can't afford that. We can't do that. That would have been for 2 weeks of early voting, absentee process, and election day. However, here, cavalierly, on an emergency item, we're willing to spend somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000, according to the city clerk and city attorney, to add one little extra day of early voting. And when we look at who voted in early voting, we were getting approximately 200 votes a day. So you're looking to spend about $300 per voter for people to come out in one extra day of early voting. Whether it's intended or unintended, the unintended consequences that the perception is that this is being done to help benefit certain candidates. And that is wrong. Next, we've already advertised on our website 2 days of early voting for months. The county has advertised 2 days of early voting for months. We took out an ad in last week's Miami Herald that we were going to do 2 days of early voting. Who's going to know about this? I mean, who is going to know about this? When you bring something on and as an emergency item, days before, it leads to the perception that certain candidates were tipped off to do this. And I can't support that. Next, we're changing precedent of how we have done early voting for the past at least 20 years that I've been involved in the election process. We have never done more than the 2 days of early voting. I personally think that doing a third day is a good thing. I would vote for expanding early voting starting in the next election cycle. That's the problem, and that's really, I think, the legal issue with this. It's not the expansion. The expansion is good. We all want to have people come out and vote. We all want to give voters every opportunity to vote. But when you expand it in the middle of the process, it's wrong. It should be prospective, and I would support expanding early voting in prospective elections. Next, I think we should remove the turkey issue. I'm not supporting this item at all, but if this body decides to support it, which I think is wrong for the reasons stated, you should at least try to make it a little less wrong by removing the turkey controversy. Certainly, South Florida Seniors in Action is not to blame. They're trying to do a good public service that we all support. I support. I do find, I'm going to just state it, I thought it was really weird that you're doing it 13 days before Thanksgiving. I don't recall a time it's ever been done that far in advance. these turkey meals will have to stay good for 2 weeks. A lot of these low-income seniors don't have full-size refrigerators. They have mini refrigerators. I don't know how getting your meal 2 weeks in advance, the food is going to stay good that time. I'm concerned that the turkeys may smell as bad as this item. My next concern is who reached out to do this? Nobody reached out to me concerned about expanding early voting, not by phone, not by email, not by Facebook, not by Twitter. So it leads to the perception that some inside group thought this was going to be good for them or their candidate. We should not, and I will not, be part of a process that can be perceived as being unethical and corrupt. We have enough issues with voter confidence. We just saw at the last election that the voters squarely rejected 4 ballot questions proposed by this body, most of which I wasn't supporting, so I wasn't surprised. But that's a sign. I mean, I've been on 3 different commissions that has proposed dozens of ballot questions, and I have never and cannot recall ever a time when voters rejected the majority of the ballot questions that the commission put out. And that is a sign that there is some distrust over this body. So I would urge my colleagues to think long and hard about this. For those of you that will be here, I think the voters will remember that, whether it's now or whether it's in 2 years. We must protect the process. We must do what's right. As good an idea as this is to expand early voting, now is not the moment. Do it prospectively.